still remember that evening, not as a celebration, but as a kind of silence that slowly swallowed every sound I knew. The wedding rituals were finally over. The music, the laughter, the voices of relatives, everything that had filled the day with noise and movement was suddenly far behind me. I was sitting inside a wooden carriage, my hands tightly folded in my lap, my bangles slightly heavier than they had ever felt before. Outside, the road moved slowly under the wheels, but inside me, nothing felt like movement, only stillness. My husband sat beside me, but not close in the way I had imagined marriage would feel. He was there, yet already somewhere else in his thoughts. Occasionally, he looked outside, acknowledging passing villagers who waved at us, but no one looked at me as if I had just changed my entire life. And that was the first strange feeling I cannot forget. Not sadness yet, not fear yet, just a quiet confusion. When we finally reached his home, I remember the moment the carriage stopped. It wasn't dramatic. No one announced it. No one paused the world. The wheel simply stopped turning, and I realized this was it. This was the place I was now supposed to call home. The front door was slightly open, as if the house had been waiting, but not expecting anything special. People gathered outside immediately, family members, relatives, neighbors. I could hear soft conversations, greetings, footsteps moving in patterns I did not yet understand. Someone helped me step down. My feet touched the ground slowly, carefully, as if even the earth beneath me was unfamiliar. And then I looked up. The house was large, not frightening, just unfamiliar in a way that made my chest tighten slightly. The doorway looked like it belonged to many lives before mine, lives that knew where to stand, where to speak, where to belong. I did not. Someone said my name softly, but it did not feel like my name belonged there yet. It sounded distant, like it was being tested in a new language. I remember smiling because I thought I was supposed to. That is what brides do, I had been told. They smile, they adjust, they accept. But inside, I felt something else rising quietly. A question I could not say out loud. Why does everything feel like I am entering, but not arriving? They took me inside. The house was alive in movement, but not in attention. Someone guided me through a hallway. Someone else adjusted my veil slightly. A child ran past me without looking up. A woman whispered something behind her hand. Everything happened around me, not with me. It was like standing inside a river that flows past your feet, but never carries you with it. And then I was shown a room, not introduced to it, not welcomed into it, just shown. Here, someone said casually, as if the room had always existed for me, even before I existed for it. The door creaked slightly when it opened. Inside was a simple arrangement, a bed, a small lamp, a wooden shelf. It was clean. It was quiet. It was waiting. I stepped inside, and the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt felt something I could not explain at that time. The noise of the house softened instantly behind me, as if I had entered a different layer of the same world. The door closed gently, not loudly, but somehow that soft closing sound stayed with me longer than any celebration of the day. Click, and suddenly I was alone. I stood there for a long time without moving. My hands were still decorated with wedding bangles, but my mind felt strangely undecorated, like everything familiar had been left behind outside that room. The lamp in the corner flickered slightly. A soft golden glow touched the walls, but even that warmth felt distant, like it belonged to the room, not to me. I remember sitting slowly on the edge of the bed. It was soft, too soft, as if even the bed did not yet understand how I would sit on it. My eyes moved around the room again and again, searching for something familiar. But there was nothing familiar here. Not a sound I recognized. Not a corner I remembered. Not even silence that felt like mine. And then came the first thought, very quiet, almost careful. Is this how leaving home feels? Not leaving in the physical sense, but leaving the version of yourself that everyone still remembers. The version that laughs in a known courtyard. The version that knows where the kitchen is without asking. The version that is called by name without hesitation. Here I was none of that yet. I was simply new, unwritten, unplaced. Outside the room, I could still hear faint movement of the house. Someone walking, someone speaking softly, utensils touching. Life continuing effortlessly, as if nothing had changed at all. But inside that room, I felt like I had changed completely, and no one had noticed yet. I placed my hands gently in my lap. The bangles made a soft sound when they touched each other. That small sound became the only proof that I was still here, still real, still present. And I remember thinking, will I always feel like I am standing slightly outside my own life from now on? The lamp flickered once more, and in that flicker, the room felt like it was breathing slowly with me. Not comforting, not frightening, just present. And that is how my first night after marriage truly began. Not with celebration, not with warmth, but with a quiet realization that I had entered a place where everyone knew each other except me. I had expected that after entering the house, something would soften. A voice that felt warmer, a smile that felt closer, a moment that would quietly say, "You are here now." But what I found instead was something far more subtle and harder to understand. Everything continued as if I had simply moved from one room to another in a world that already belonged to everyone else. A few family members entered the room where I was seated, not all at once, one by one. Each presence felt like a small wave entering a larger ocean that I did not yet know how to swim in. Someone placed a tray of water near me. Someone adjusted the edge of my veil again. Someone asked me if I was tired. questions were light, almost routine, like they were meant to complete a ritual, not to truly know my answer. I nodded softly each time, because I did not yet know what else to do with my silence. My husband was there too, but only briefly. He stood near the doorway, speaking to others outside the room. I remember watching him more than anything else, not because I expected him to stay, but because I was trying to understand where I now stood in relation to him. He laughed once at something someone said outside, a normal laugh, familiar to him, but unfamiliar to me in this new setting. And I wondered quietly, was I now part of his world, or just visiting it? After a while, someone gently told me I should rest. The tone was polite, careful, almost practiced, not unkind, but also not inviting. And that difference, I didn't understand then, but I felt it deeply. They were not pushing me away. They were simply continuing their lives around me. I was shown where things were, where to keep my belongings, where the water was, where I should sit if I needed anything. Small instructions given calmly, as if I had entered a place that already had its own rhythm long before I arrived. I kept listening carefully, nodding, trying to remember everything, because I thought belonging might begin with remembering. But even as I followed every instruction, I felt something quietly forming inside me. A strange distance, not from them, but from myself, as if I was watching a version of me from slightly outside my body, learning how to behave in a life that was not yet fully mine. At one point, I remember standing near the doorway of the room. The hallway outside was filled with soft movement, someone calling out for something, someone laughing faintly, someone walking quickly past. Life was happening continuously, effortlessly, without noticing the small stillness where I stood. And I remember thinking, how can a place feel so alive and still not notice me at all? No one ignored me intentionally. That is what makes it difficult to describe even now. It was not rejection. It was simply continuation, as if I had stepped into a story that was already halfway written. A young girl passed by the room and looked at me briefly. Just a glance, curious, neutral. Then she moved on. That single glance stayed with me longer than any conversation that evening, because in that moment, I realized something quietly unsettling. I was no longer someone everyone knew. I was someone everyone would slowly learn. I returned to sit on the bed again. The lamp in the corner still burned softly. Its light made the room feel warmer than it actually felt. But warmth and belonging are not always the same thing. I was beginning to understand that difference. Outside, the household slowly shifted into evening rhythm. Doors closing, water being poured, soft footsteps fading into corridors, the sounds of people settling into a life that had existed long before I entered it. And I sat there listening, not interrupting, not participating, just observing a life that was already complete without me. At some point, I realized I had stopped waiting for someone to call me again. That realization was small, but it changed something inside me, because waiting is still a form of hope, and I had unknowingly stepped slightly beyond it. My hands rested quietly in my lap. The bangles were still slightly heavy, but I no longer noticed their weight as much. Instead, I noticed the space around me more, the silence between sounds, the pauses between footsteps, the distance between here and belonging. And I remember asking myself very softly, is this what becoming part of a new family feels like? Or is this just the beginning of learning how to be alone in a crowd? The question had no answer that night, and perhaps it was not meant to, because some feelings do not explain themselves immediately. They simply arrive and stay. When the house finally settled into its quieter rhythm, I returned to the room again, as if it was the only place that had been assigned to me for the moment. But even then, it did not feel like something that belonged to me. It felt more like a space I had been temporarily placed inside, until someone decided where I truly fit. The door closed behind me with the same soft sound as before. Not heavy, not sharp, just final in a quiet way. And each time I heard it, I became more aware of how sound itself can change the way a place feels. Inside this room, even silence had layers. I walked slowly toward the center. My footsteps were careful, almost hesitant, like I was afraid the floor might not recognize me yet. The room was simple. A bed placed neatly against the wall, a small wooden shelf, a lamp that flickered gently as if it was still learning how to stay steady. Everything was arranged with care, but not with familiarity. And that difference mattered more than I understood at the time. I remember touching the edge of the bed again, this time not sitting immediately, just standing there, letting my fingers rest on the fabric. It was clean, fresh, but not warm in the way familiar things are warm. It had no memory of me yet. On the wall, a faint shadow moved with the flickering lamp. At first, I thought it was someone standing behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one, only my own reflection in the dim surface of a wooden frame. That was the first time I truly noticed how alone I was in that room. Not alone in the physical sense, but alone in recognition. No one here knew my habits. No one knew how I preferred to sit. No one knew when I would feel comfortable or uncomfortable. I was simply present, but not yet understood. I sat down again slowly. This time, I did not adjust my sari immediately. I let myself stay still, and in that stillness, I began noticing small sounds I had ignored before. The faint creak of wood when the house shifted, the distant voice of someone calling for water, the soft movement of wind outside the window. Each sound felt like it belonged to a world that continued regardless of me. And I remember thinking something I could not say out loud. Even if I disappeared quietly from this room, the house would not notice immediately. It was not a sad thought at first, just a factual one, but slowly it began to feel heavier than I expected. I stood up again and walked toward the small window. Outside, the night had fully settled. Darkness was not frightening. It was calm, but it felt distant, like it belonged to a different life entirely, a life where I was not yet included. The glass reflected my face faintly. A young bride, new jewelry still in place, eyes slightly tired from the long day. But behind that reflection, I could see nothing familiar in the surroundings. Only shapes, only shadows, only unknown space. I pressed my palm gently against the window frame. It was cool. That small coolness grounded me for a moment. But even that feeling passed quickly, like everything else was passing, without leaving a permanent mark on me yet. Somewhere outside the room, I heard laughter again. Soft, familiar to those who were laughing, but distant to me. And I realized something slowly. I was not outside their world. I was inside it, but not yet inside their awareness. That distinction stayed with me, because being physically present somewhere does not always mean being emotionally included. And I did not know which version of presence I was experiencing yet. I returned to the bed once more. This time, I did not resist sitting. I let myself settle into it fully. The mattress softened slightly under my weight, as if accepting that I would remain there for the night. But I was still not sure if I belonged to it, or if it belonged to me. My hands rested again in my lap. The bangles made a soft, almost musical sound when they touched each other. That sound became a kind of companion in the silence, a reminder that I was still here, still awake, still trying to understand. I remember closing my eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to escape the feeling of being seen by nothing and no one at the same time. But even with eyes closed, awareness remained. The house continued its life, and I continued my silence. And in that quiet moment, a thought appeared again, gentle, uncertain, almost like a whisper from within. If this is my new home, why does it feel like I am still waiting to arrive? I began to understand something slowly that night. It was not that the house was unkind. It was that the house already had its own rhythm, and I had not yet found where I fit inside it. From the bed, I could hear everything more clearly, not because the sounds were loud, but because the silence around me made even small noises feel meaningful. A spoon touching a steel plate somewhere far away. A door opening and closing softly. Footsteps moving across the corridor in no particular hurry. Life continuing without pause, without awareness that I was listening. At first, I tried not to pay attention. I turned slightly, adjusted my position, closed my eyes again. But the house did not become quieter. It simply remained itself, and I remained myself inside it, separate, parallel, not connected, I remember thinking that in my old home, sounds meant something different. A voice calling my name meant I was needed. Footsteps approaching meant someone was coming to speak to me. Even silence had familiarity there, because I knew what it usually meant. Here, every sound was unfamiliar. Even the silence felt like it belonged to someone else. At one point, I heard laughter from outside the room. It was soft and natural. The kind of laughter that comes without effort. It made me pause, not because it was strange, but because it reminded me that life outside this room was flowing without hesitation, and I was not part of that flow yet. Not excluded, not rejected, just unabsorbed. I sat up slightly on the bed. The lamp still burned in the corner. Its light had grown softer now, as if it too was preparing for rest. Shadows stretched gently across the walls, and I realized I had started to memorize the shape of this room already, even though I still did not feel like it was mine. There was a moment when I considered opening the door, just slightly, to stand outside, to see what happens when I step back into the movement of the house. But I did not move. Something held me still. Not fear exactly, more like uncertainty about whether I would be noticed or simply passed by. Instead, I stayed where I was, listening, observing, learning the language of a house that did not yet include me in its conversations. A faint sound of water being poured reached me. Then silence again. Then a distant voice calling someone's name. Not mine. Never mine. At least not yet. And slowly, I began to realize something subtle. This house did not ignore me. It simply had not learned me yet. There is a difference between absence and unfamiliarity. But at that moment, I did not know how to separate them. I lay back again. The bed felt softer now than before. Or maybe I had simply become more aware of the weight of my own thoughts. I stared at the ceiling. It was plain, unmarked. Like everything else in this room, it had no memory of me, and I wondered how long it takes for a place to begin remembering a person. Outside, the house gradually grew quieter. The sounds faded one by one. Footsteps became less frequent. Voices softened into whispers. And eventually, even movement became rare. But silence did not bring peace. It brought awareness. Because when everything else becomes still, you begin to hear yourself more clearly. I could hear my own breathing. Slow, careful, almost as if even my breath was trying not to disturb the unfamiliar world around me. My hands rested again on my lap. The bangles had become quiet now. Even they seemed tired from the long day. And in that stillness, a thought returned, but softer this time. If I stop trying to understand this place, will it finally start to understand me? I did not answer it, because I didn't know how. And slowly, without realizing it, I simply kept listening to the house until the night deepened further. It happened later in the evening when someone gently called me, not with excitement, not with ceremony, just a simple voice from outside the room. "Come eat." That was all. I stood up slowly. For a moment, I hesitated at the door, because stepping out felt different now. Not like entering a home, but like stepping back into a world that still hadn't decided how to see me. The corridor outside was dimly lit. The same house I had entered earlier now felt slightly more familiar, but not less distant. People moved through it naturally, as if I was the only one still learning its rhythm. I followed quietly. My footsteps were soft against the floor. Each step reminded me that I was moving through a space where everyone already knew where to go, except me. The dining area was already prepared. Steel plates placed neatly. Food arranged in simple portions. Steam rising gently from a few dishes. The smell was warm, comforting, almost inviting. But comfort and belonging are not the same thing. I was learning that slowly. I sat down carefully, not at the head, not at the center, just wherever I was guided. No one made it obvious, and that subtle absence of direction made me more aware of everything. People around me began eating. Normal conversations continued in soft tones. A few words exchanged. A few smiles shared. Nothing felt wrong, yet nothing felt directed toward me either. I picked up my spoon slowly. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were not, because I realized something strange in that moment. I did not know where to begin, not just with the food, but with being here. Someone asked a question nearby. I think it was about the wedding arrangements. I answered softly, shortly, carefully. And then the conversation moved on without pause. It wasn't that I was being ignored. It was that I had not yet become part of the natural flow of conversation, like a voice that had not been tuned into the right frequency yet. I kept eating slowly. The food was good, but my attention kept drifting between the plate and the people around me, watching how easily they interacted, how naturally they knew each other's expressions, how effortlessly they existed together. And I sat there wondering, how long does it take to become part of a place without feeling like an outsider in it? A child nearby laughed suddenly. It was a small, harmless sound, but it made me notice how freely children belong anywhere without needing permission. I wished, quietly, that belonging could be that simple. My husband was seated not far from me. He spoke occasionally with others. He did not seem distant, but he also did not seem aware of my silence. Or perhaps he assumed silence was normal for me. I couldn't tell yet. There was a moment when I almost spoke, almost asked something small, but I stopped because I wasn't sure if my voice would fit into this conversation yet, or if it would feel like an interruption. So I stayed quiet. The meal continued. Plate sounds, soft conversation, occasional movement of chairs. Life happening in layers around me, and I remained in the middle of it, slightly untouched. I remember noticing how quickly others finished eating, how naturally they stood up, how easily they returned to their own spaces, as if the meal was just a brief meeting point, not a shared experience. When I finished, I placed my plate gently aside. No one noticed the exact moment, not because they didn't care, but because the moment itself was not special in their rhythm. And that realization stayed with me longer than the meal itself. I stood up slowly and looked around once more. The room was already shifting back into motion, clearing plates, soft instructions, people leaving. I was still there, but not fully part of the transition. And as I walked back toward the room, I felt something quiet settle inside me. Not sadness, exactly. Not rejection. Just the awareness that I was still learning how to exist in this new pattern of life. And I remember thinking softly, maybe I am not invisible. Maybe I am just not familiar yet. When I returned to the room after dinner, the house had already begun to slow down. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a breath softening before sleep. One sound after another faded into the background, and I found myself once again in the quiet space that felt both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The door closed behind me. That same gentle sound, still not heavy, but somehow more final than before, as if the house was slowly drawing a line between outside life and my space for the night. I sat on the bed without removing my jewelry immediately. My hands rested in my lap. The bangles touched each other softly, making small, delicate sounds that seemed louder in the stillness. Outside the room, the house was changing. Footsteps became fewer. Voices turned into whispers. And then even whispers disappeared into silence. At first, I thought silence would feel comforting. I had always believed night meant rest. But that night, silence did something else. It made everything I had felt during the day return more clearly. I lay down slowly. The lamp was still burning in the corner. Its light was weaker now, as if even it was tired. Shadows moved gently on the walls, like thoughts that refused to settle. And then I began to notice sounds I had not heard before. Not loud sounds, very small ones. The house settling. A faint creak somewhere far away. Wind brushing against something outside the window. A distant dog barking once, then stopping. Each sound felt separate, isolated, like pieces of a world I was listening to, but not part of. I turned slightly in bed, closed my eyes for a moment, but sleep did not come. Not yet, because my mind was still awake in a way my body was not. I started thinking about my old home. Not the big moments, just small ones. The sound of my mother moving in the kitchen early morning. The way someone always knew where I was. The comfort of being called without hesitation. Those memories came gently, but they felt far away now. Not gone, just distant. And I realized something quietly. I had never noticed how known I was before this night. Not truly, not deeply, because being known is something you only understand when you are not anymore. I shifted again on the bed. The pillow felt soft, but unfamiliar softness is different from familiar softness. One comforts the body, the other comforts the mind, and I only had one of those tonight. Outside, the house was now almost completely silent. Not empty, just resting. And in that silence, I became more aware of my own presence than anything else. My breathing, my thoughts, my stillness. I wondered if anyone else in the house was thinking about me, not in a formal way, but in a simple way, like wondering if I had eaten enough, or if I had adjusted well. But the house remained silent in response. That silence was not painful. It was just unknown. And unknown things often feel larger than they are. At one point, I sat up slightly again, looked toward the door. I thought about stepping outside, just to feel the house at night. But something kept me in place. A quiet hesitation I could not name. Instead, I stayed where I was, listening again, because listening felt safer than moving. And slowly, I began to understand. The house was not ignoring me. It was simply not built around my presence yet. That thought did not comfort me, but it softened the confusion. And sometimes that is enough. I lay back again. This time, my eyes stayed open for a long time, watching the faint movement of light and shadow on the ceiling. And I remember thinking, very quietly, if everyone here is asleep, why do I feel like I am still arriving somewhere I don't understand? The night continued, and I remained awake inside it, not afraid, not calm, just learning the shape of silence. Somewhere deep into the night, when the house outside had finally become fully still, my mind began to drift without permission. Not forward, but backward, as if silence had opened a door inside me that led to another world entirely. And suddenly, I was no longer in that unfamiliar room. I was back in my old home, not the entire house, just fragments of it. Soft, incomplete memories that arrived like quiet flashes of light. I saw the courtyard first, the place where morning sunlight used to fall in a way that felt personal, where everything was slightly warmer than the rest of the world, where even silence felt like it belonged to me. I remembered the sound of my mother's voice, not calling me urgently, just speaking my name naturally, as if it always belonged in the air. That small comfort, I had never realized its value before. I saw myself moving through familiar spaces without thinking. The kitchen, where I knew exactly where things were kept. The corner where I used to sit without needing permission. The rhythm of a place that did not need explanations. And for a moment, my chest felt lighter. Not because I was happy, but because I was known there, completely, without effort. But then the memory shifted slightly, and I became aware of something I had never noticed before. Even in my old home, I had not understood how deeply that sense of belonging shaped me. Because belonging is not something you feel constantly. It is something you only recognize when it begins to disappear. I opened my eyes slightly in the present room. The ceiling above me was still unfamiliar, the silence still different, the air still new. And I realized the contrast was not between two houses. It was between two versions of myself, one who was already formed and one who was still forming. In my old home, I was not questioned. I was not introduced. I was simply part of everything, like water in a river that already knows its direction. But here, I was learning direction itself, slowly, quietly, without guidance. I turned slightly in bed. The memory of my mother's cooking returned again. Not the food itself, but the feeling of entering a place where something was always prepared for you without asking. That feeling, I had never named it before. Now I could. It was safety. And I wondered something I could not answer. Did I ever truly understand how safe I was before I left it? The thought did not hurt sharply. It just stayed, like a soft weight in the background of my mind. Outside, the night remained unchanged. The house I was in now continued to breathe quietly in its sleep. But inside me, two worlds were now existing at the same time. One familiar, one unknown. And I began to understand something gently. Leaving home is not a single moment. It is the beginning of remembering it differently. I closed my eyes again, this time not to escape the present, but because the memory and the present had started to blend together slowly. The past felt warmer, but the present felt real. And I was somewhere between the two. And as I drifted in that in-between space, a final thought came softly. I did not leave my home in one day. I only realized I had left it when I could no longer hear it around me. I do not remember exactly when the night began to feel different. Not outside, but inside me. It was not a sudden change, more like something slowly settling down after resisting for a long time. I was still awake, but the sharpness of unfamiliarity had started to soften, not because the house had changed, but because I had stopped expecting it to become something else immediately. I turned slightly in bed. The lamp in the corner had dimmed even more now. Its light was weak, almost fading, like it was gently giving up its duty for the night. And strangely, that made the room feel less tense. The silence outside was now complete. No footsteps, no voices, no distant movement, just a full, uninterrupted stillness. And in that stillness, something shifted. I was no longer actively listening to the house. I was simply existing within it. At first, I didn't notice this change. But then I realized I was no longer searching for sounds, no longer waiting for someone to call my name, no longer expecting something to happen. That expectation had quietly fallen away. I lay there with my eyes open. The ceiling above me was still unfamiliar, but it no longer felt like it was observing me. It was just a ceiling, nothing more. And for the first time that night, I allowed myself to breathe without thinking about it. carefully, not quietly, just naturally. I remember thinking, maybe I do not need to understand everything tonight. That thought did not feel like surrender. It felt like rest. My hands moved slightly on the bed. The bangles had stopped sounding important. They were just there now. Part of me, not something I was noticing anymore. Outside, even the smallest traces of movement had disappeared. The house had fully entered its sleeping state, and I realized I had been the only part of it still holding onto wakefulness. I shifted once more and pulled the blanket slightly closer. The fabric felt different now, not more familiar, but less intimidating. And I noticed something small. The room had not changed, but my feeling toward it had softened, not into comfort yet, but into acceptance. There is a difference between fighting a space and simply existing inside it. Earlier, I was fighting without knowing. Now I was simply present. I thought again about my old home. But this time, the memory did not feel like something I had lost. It felt like something that had quietly moved behind me, still important, but no longer in front of me. And I realized something I had not understood earlier in the night. Not every unfamiliar place is a place that rejects you. Some places are just waiting for you to learn how to be inside them. I closed my eyes for a longer moment this time, not because I wanted sleep, but because I no longer felt resistance toward it. The silence around me did not feel empty anymore. It felt steady, like it had been here long before I arrived, and would remain long after I understood it, and just before sleep began to touch me gently. A final quiet thought appeared. Maybe I am not lost in this new home. Maybe I am only learning how to belong slowly. I don't know when I finally slept, but I remember when I became aware of the morning, not through light at first, but through sound. Very small, distant sounds returning to the house. A door opening somewhere. Water being poured. Soft footsteps again, this time slower, more intentional. The house was waking up, but something inside me still felt suspended between sleep and awareness. I slowly opened my eyes. The room looked the same as it had last night. Same walls, same bed, same quiet lamp, now completely off. Nothing had changed visually, but everything felt slightly different. Morning light was entering gently through the window. Not bright, not sharp, just soft and neutral, as if even the sun did not want to disturb what had happened in the night. I sat up slowly. My body felt rested, but my thoughts did not feel refreshed in the way I expected mornings to feel. It was not exhaustion. It was continuity, as if the night had not ended something, but only extended itself in a quieter form. Outside, the house was active again, but differently than yesterday. Yesterday's movement had felt unknown. Today's movement felt routine, and I was still outside that routine. I listened. Footsteps passing, voices speaking briefly, the sound of utensils again. Life continuing in its familiar pattern. And I realized something quietly unsettling. Nothing outside this room had changed because of my feelings. I stood up and adjusted my sari slowly. The mirror reflected a face that looked slightly different in morning light. Not changed, just more aware. For a moment, I waited. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a feeling of belonging to suddenly arrive with daylight. Maybe a sense that now I am part of this. But nothing like that came. Instead, there was only normal morning life continuing outside. Uninterrupted, unaware, I walked toward the door and opened it gently. The same corridor, the same house. But now I could see it more clearly. Not emotionally distant, just structurally the same as before. Someone passed by and greeted me softly. A nod, a small smile, polite, familiar, but not transformative, and I returned the gesture automatically. It felt strange how the world could continue so normally after a night that felt so internally large. That was the first time I understood. Emotional change inside a person does not always create visible change outside them. I sat near the doorway for a while, just observing, not trying to understand everything, not trying to belong immediately, just noticing. And in that quiet morning, I realized something important. The house had not rejected me, and it had not accepted me fully yet either. It had simply continued existing. And now, so had I thought about last night again. The silence, the unfamiliar room, the feeling of being unseen, it all still existed in memory, but it no longer felt sharp. It felt distant, like something slowly settling into understanding. And I found myself thinking, maybe mornings do not fix nights. They only reveal that we survived them. I stayed there for a moment longer, breathing normally now, not carefully anymore, just naturally. And for the first time since I arrived, I did not feel like I was waiting for something to begin. I felt like I was already inside it, slowly, quietly, without announcement. Many years have passed since that night. Sometimes I wonder if it truly happened the way I remember it, or if memory has softened it into something quieter than it was. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can still return to that room. That first room, that first silence, that first feeling of not yet belonging. Back then, I thought I had entered a new life, but now I understand something more gentle. I had not entered a life. I had entered a transition, a space between who I was and who I was becoming. That night did not mark the beginning of marriage. It marked the beginning of understanding what it means to be inside a life that does not immediately recognize you. In the early days, I believed loneliness meant something was wrong. Now, I know loneliness can also mean something is forming, quietly, slowly, without witness. I remember how carefully I listened to every sound in that house, how I searched for meaning in footsteps, in silence, in doors opening. And now I smile at that version of myself, because because she did not yet know that belonging is not announced. It is built. There was no moment where the house suddenly became mine. No single conversation that changed everything. No dramatic shift. Only time and repetition and small, unnoticed familiarity building itself day after day. And one day, without realizing it, I was no longer the new bride in the corner of the room. I was simply there, part of the house's rhythm, not because I forced it, but because I stayed long enough for life to adjust around me. But that first night stayed with me differently. Not as pain, not as sadness, but as awareness. Because it taught me something I never forgot. Not every silence is empty. Some silences are just waiting for you to stop fearing them. Now, when I think back, I don't remember the house as unfamiliar anymore. I remember it as patient, waiting for me to learn its language, just as I was learning how to live inside it. And maybe that is what life truly is. Not arriving suddenly, but slowly becoming familiar with places that once felt too large for your presence. If you are listening to this now, somewhere in your own quiet night, feeling like you do not fully belong yet, then hear this gently. You do not have to belong immediately. You only have to stay long enough to become familiar with your own place in the world. Because even unfamiliar rooms, even unfamiliar lives, even unfamiliar beginnings eventually learn your name. And before sleep finally takes you, let this thought remain softly in your mind. I was not lost that night. I was only becoming someone the house had not met yet. The house grows quieter now. The world softens its edges, and everything that felt uncertain slowly becomes still. You do not need to understand everything tonight. You only need to rest inside it.